Frank Sinatra was halfway through I've Got You Under My Skin when he saw her walk through the door. He didn't stop singing immediately. His voice continued for another 3 or 4 words before it faltered, caught somewhere between his throat and the microphone. The orchestra kept playing. The audience didn't notice at first, but the musicians did. They had seen Frank perform 1,000 times, and they had never seen him lose his place in a song, never seen his hand grip the microphone stand like he needed it to stay standing, never seen his eyes go completely empty like someone had just unplugged something inside him. Ava Gardner had just walked into the Copacabana, and she wasn't alone. The date was March 17, 1953. It had been exactly 4 months since the divorce was finalized. For months since Frank had signed papers that ended the most destructive, most passionate, most all-consuming relationship of his life. For months since he had lost the only woman who had ever made him feel like Frank Sinatra wasn't enough. The Copa was packed that night. It was always packed when Frank performed. Even though his career was in trouble, even though Columbia Records had dropped him, even though the movie offers had dried up, people still came to see Frank Sinatra sing. Because when Frank sang, something happened in the room, something that couldn't be explained or replicated. It was magic, or it was heartbreak, or it was both. Frank had been performing well that night. His voice was strong. The crowd was with him. He had done The Lady as a Tramp. He had done Night and Day. He was in the middle of his set when the Motta D led Ava and her date to a table near the front. Not the front row, but close enough. Close enough that Frank could see her face. Close enough that she could see his. The song stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. Frank's voice cut off mid-phrase and the room went quiet. The band leader, a man named Skitch Henderson, kept conducting for another measure before he realized Frank wasn't singing anymore. Then the music died to. Frank stood there under the spotlight, staring at Ava. She was wearing a black dress. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like she always looked like the most beautiful woman in any room she entered. And next to her, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, was a man Frank recognized. His name was Luis Miguel Dominguín. He was a Spanish bullfighter. He was famous in Europe. He was rich, handsome, and dangerous in the way that men who fought bulls for a living were dangerous, and he had his hand on Ava's shoulder. The audience started to realize something was wrong. People turned in their seats to see what Frank was looking at. They followed his gaze to the table near the front, to Ava Gardner, to the bullfighter, to the hand on her shoulder. The silence in the Copacabana stretched from seconds into something that felt like minutes. Frank just stood there, gripping the microphone stand, not moving, not speaking, just staring. Ava looked back at him. Her face showed nothing. No surprise, no embarrassment, no regret. She just looked at him the way you might look at a stranger on a train, polite, distant, empty. Frank had known this moment was coming. He had known that eventually he would see Ava with another man. He had known that eventually she would move on, the way she always moved on. Ava Gardner didn't stay with anyone for long. She got bored. She got restless. She needed excitement and danger and chaos, and once the chaos settled into anything resembling stability, she left. Frank had known this. He had always known this. But knowing something and seeing it are different things. And seeing Ava Gardner sitting 15 feet away from him with another man's hand on her shoulder was different than imagining it in his apartment at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. Someone in the audience coughed. The sound broke whatever spell had frozen the room. Frank blinked. He looked away from Ava, down at the floor, then back up at the audience. "Sorry, folks," he said. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Lost my place there for a second." He nodded to Skitch Henderson. "Let's take it from the top." The orchestra started playing I've Got You Under My Skin again from the beginning. Frank started singing, but something had changed in his voice. It was rawer now, more exposed. Every word sounded like it was being pulled out of him against his will. The audience could feel it. Something was happening on that stage that went beyond performance. Frank Sinatra was singing a song about obsession and desire, and being unable to let go. And 15 feet away sat the woman who had destroyed him. The woman who had made him leave his wife and children. The woman who had made him beg. The woman who had reduced him from the biggest star in America to a man who would sit outside her house at night just to see if her lights were on. Frank sang the whole song looking directly at Ava. She looked back at him for the first verse. Then she looked away. She picked up her drink. She said something to the bullfighter. She laughed at whatever he said back. She acted like Frank Sinatra wasn't standing on a stage 10 feet away from her singing his heart out. When the song ended, there was applause. Loud applause. The kind of applause that happens when an audience knows they've witnessed something real. Frank nodded his thanks. He took a sip of water. He looked at the audience and said, "That was for an old friend." Then he launched into the next song without waiting for the applause to die down. He sang One for My Baby. He sang it slowly, stretching out every word, turning it into something that felt more like a confession than a performance. And this time Ava didn't look away. She sat perfectly still, watching him, her face unreadable. The bullfighter leaned over and whispered something to her. Ava shook her head without taking her eyes off Frank. The bullfighter tried again. This time Ava turned to him and said something sharp. Frank couldn't hear what she said, but he could see the bullfighter's face change. could see him lean back in his chair and go quiet. And then Ava was looking at Frank again, just looking, not smiling, not crying, just watching him sing. Frank finished One for My Baby and went straight into I'm a Fool to Want You. This was the song he had co-written 2 years earlier, at the height of his obsession with Ava, the song he had recorded in one take because he couldn't get through it a second time without breaking down, the song that was so obviously about her that radio stations would introduce it by saying, and here's Frank Sinatra singing about Ava Gardner. He sang it at the Copa that night like he was the only person in the room, like the audience didn't exist, like the orchestra didn't exist, like there was nothing in the world except him and Ava and the 15 feet of space between them that might as well have been an ocean. When the song ended, Frank lowered the microphone. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, looking at Ava. Then he said into the microphone, I need to take a break. I'll be back in 15 minutes. He walked off the stage without waiting for a response. The audience sat in confused silence. Frank Sinatra didn't take breaks in the middle of his sets. It wasn't how he worked, but he was gone, disappearing through a door behind the stage, leaving the orchestra and the audience and Ava Gardner sitting in the dim light of the Copacabana. Frank went to his dressing room. He closed the door. He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. There was a bottle of Jack Daniels on the table. He picked it up, looked at it, then put it back down without drinking. He just sat there, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to figure out how he was going to go back out there and finish the show. There was a knock on the door. Frank didn't answer. The knock came again. Frank, it was Ava's voice. Frank looked at the door. He didn't move. Frank, I know you're in there. Open the door. Frank stood up. He walked to the door. He stood there with his hand on the knob for a long moment. Then he opened it. Ava was standing in the hallway alone. The bullfighter wasn't with her. She looked at Frank and Frank looked at her, and for a few seconds neither of them said anything. Finally, Ava spoke. You can't do this. Do what? This. Ava gestured vaguely. You can't fall apart every time you see me. We're divorced. Frank, it's over. Frank laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. Is it? Ava's expression hardened. Yes, it is. And you standing up there singing those songs at me like some lovesick teenager isn't going to change that. Frank leaned against the doorframe. Then why are you here, Ava? Why did you come to my show? I came because Luis wanted to see you perform. He's a fan. Bullshit. Ava's eyes flashed. Don't do that. Don't make this into something it's not. Then what is it? You show up at my show with some bullfighter for months after our divorce is finalized. You sit right up front where you know I'll see you. And now you're standing here telling me I can't sing songs about you. What exactly am I supposed to do, Ava? Ava looked away. When she looked back, her expression had softened slightly. I didn't come here to hurt you, Frank. Then why did you come? Because I wanted to see you. Because I miss you. Because she stopped. Frank waited. Because what? Ava shook her head. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. It shouldn't. Frank, we're toxic together. You know that. I know that. Everyone knows that. We can't be in the same room without destroying each other. Frank reached out and touched her face. Ava didn't pull away. I don't care, Frank said quietly. I'd rather be destroyed by you than survive without you. Ava closed her eyes. Don't say things like that. It's true. That doesn't make it any less stupid. They stood there in the hallway of the Copacabana. Frank's hand on Ava's face. Ava's eyes closed. The sound of the audience murmuring in the distance. Then Ava opened her eyes and stepped back. You need to finish your show, Frank. Come back to my place after, Frank, just to talk. Just for an hour, please. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. 1 hour, that's all. She turned and walked back down the hallway toward the main room. Frank watched her go. Then he went back into his dressing room and splashed water on his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked older than his 37 years. Tired, worn down. He thought about what Ava had said. About them being toxic. About destroying each other. She was right. He knew she was right. But he also knew that he would take 1 hour with Ava Gardner over a lifetime with anyone else. Frank went back out on stage. The audience applauded when they saw him. He picked up the microphone and said, sorry about that, folks. Where were we? He sang for another 40 minutes. He sang all of me. He sang You Make Me Feel So Young. He sang My Funny Valentine. And he sang every song like it was the last song he would ever sing. When the show ended, the audience gave him a standing ovation. Frank bowed. He thanked them. He walked off stage and went straight to his dressing room. He changed out of his tuxedo into a suit. He combed his hair. He looked at the bottle of Jack Daniels again, and this time he took a drink. Just one. Then he walked out to the front of the club. Ava was waiting by the entrance. The bullfighter was gone. Where's your friend? Frank asked. I sent him back to the hotel. They walked outside together. Frank's car was waiting. They got in the back seat, and the driver pulled away from the curb. Neither of them spoke during the drive to Frank's apartment. They just sat next to each other in the dark, not touching, not looking at each other. When they got to Frank's building, they went upstairs. Frank unlocked the door and turned on the lights. The apartment was neat, almost obsessively so. Everything in its place. No clutter, no personality. It looked like a hotel room. You want a drink? Frank asked. Sure. Frank poured 2 glasses of scotch. He handed one to Ava. She took it but didn't drink. She just stood there holding the glass, looking around the apartment. This place is depressing. Frank, I'm not here much. That's not what I mean. It looks like you're waiting for your life to start. Frank sat down on the couch. Maybe I am. Ava sat down next to him. Not close, just on the same couch. You can't keep living like this. Like what? Like you're in purgatory. You need to move on. Frank, you need to find someone else. Frank looked at her. I don't want someone else, that's the problem. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Frank said, do you love him? Luisa Ava thought about it. I don't know. Maybe he's different from you. How? He doesn't need me the way you need me. He's not obsessed. He's not. I get it. Ava put her hand on Frank's. I loved you, Frank. I still love you. But I can't be what you need me to be. I can't be your whole world. It's too much pressure. It's suffocating. Frank pulled his hand away. So, that's it. You just leave. I didn't leave. Frank, you pushed me away. You were so desperate to hold on to me that you squeezed all the air out of the relationship. You called me 50 times a day. You showed up at my film sets. You got jealous if I talked to other men. You made me feel like I was drowning. Frank stood up and walked to the window. I just loved you, I know. But there's a difference between love and possession, and somewhere along the way, you crossed that line. Frank didn't say anything. He just stood there looking out at the New York skyline. Ava finished her drink and set the glass down. I should go stay. Frank, just tonight. Just sleep here. On the couch. I won't touch you. I don't want to be alone tonight. Ava looked at him standing by the window. Looked at the way his shoulders were slumped. Looked at the loneliness radiating off him like heat. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. Frank brought her a blanket and a pillow. He said goodnight and went to his bedroom. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing Ava was 20 feet away on his couch. Knowing this was probably the last time she would ever be in his apartment. Knowing that in the morning she would leave and go back to the bullfighter and that would be the end. He didn't sleep. He just lay there listening to the sounds of the city. Thinking about the moment at the Copa when he had seen her walk through the door. Thinking about the look on her face when he sang I'm a Fool to Want You. Thinking about the fact that he had meant every word of that song and she had known it. When morning came, Frank got up and went to the living room. Ava was already awake. She had folded the blanket neatly and put the pillow on top. She was putting on her shoes. I called a car, she said. It'll be here in a few minutes. Frank nodded. Okay. They stood there looking at each other. Thank you for letting me stay, Ava said. Anytime. Ava smiled sadly. Don't say that, Frank. We both know this can't happen again. There was a knock on the door. The car had arrived. Ava picked up her purse and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the knob and turned back to Frank. Take care of yourself, Frank, you too. She opened the door and left. Frank listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. He heard the elevator ding. He heard the doors close. Then there was silence. Frank went back to bed. He didn't have a show that night. He didn't have anywhere to be. He just lay there in the dark thinking about Ava, thinking about the Copa, thinking about the fact that he had survived another encounter with her without completely falling apart. It felt like a small victory, a pathetic victory, but a victory nonetheless. Over the next few years, Frank would see Ava occasionally, at parties, at restaurants, at award shows. Each time it got a little easier. The pain dulled from a knife wound to a dull ache. Frank's career recovered. He made From Here to Eternity and won an Oscar. He signed with Capitol Records and started having hit records again. He became the chairman of the board. He became untouchable. But every once in a while, late at night, he would put on a record, he would pour a drink, and he would think about that night at the Copacabana when Ava Gardner walked through the door and he stopped singing mid-song because seeing her had knocked the air out of his lungs. Ava married the bullfighter. The marriage lasted less than a year. She had other relationships after that, other men, other disasters. But she never married again, and years later when someone asked her who the love of her life had been, she said without hesitation, Frank Sinatra. When Frank heard about it, he didn't say anything. He just smiled that sad, knowing smile of his, because he had always known that what they had was bigger than both of them, that it was too big to survive, that it was the kind of love that only works in songs. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. Ava Gardner had died 8 years earlier. In 1990, when Frank got the news that Ava had died, he didn't go to the funeral. He didn't make a statement. He just locked himself in his house for 3 days. And during those 3 days, no one knows what he did. No one knows if he cried or if he raged or if he just sat quietly with his memories. But people close to Frank said that something changed in him after Ava died. That the last piece of him that had stayed young finally grew old. That he had spent 40 years carrying around the hope that maybe, somehow, they would find their way back to each other. And when she died, that hope died too. The night at the Copacabana in 1953 was just one night, just one moment in a relationship that spanned decades. But it was the moment when Frank finally understood that loving Ava Gardner meant learning to let her go, meant learning to sing the songs without falling apart, meant learning to see her with other men and survive it. It wasn't acceptance, It wasn't closure, it was just survival. And for Frank Sinatra, a man who had survived poverty and the mob in Hollywood and fame, surviving the loss of Ava Gardner was the hardest thing he ever had to do.